Thank you for inviting me. As you said, we were speaking on the phone a lot, and you told me about this inspiring background of this Inspire&Dine. So what I did in my presentation here is actually try to give some kind of food for thought, right? And then later also for the discussions, and I will kick off, if that works, with Bill Gates here, who started to, who said this quote, I think it was 2 or 3 years at the Munich Security Conference, where he said the world needs to prepare for pandemic in the same serious way it needs to prepare for war. And this is actually the way we as people who are dealing with the nexus of security and health look to pandemics and epidemics. And what Bill Gates is referring to is exactly what we see right now. He's referring to health risks that spread globally, and that we would call kind of hybrid threats that affect the resilience of states and society at its heart. And it's basically what we call disease X. It is a disease that we know nothing about, right? We don't know when it occurs or where it occurs or what it is, how we treat the disease, and you know, how we need to do research on it. And disease X has been on the short list of the WHO blueprint priority diseases as a hypothetical unknown pathogen that is causing epidemics or pandemics since 2018. And COVID-19 is basically meeting a lot of the criteria for a disease. We didn't know when it occurred. Actually, today I got a new data that says that in the US we have probably had cases before the first official US case has been recognized. So that means that we actually need to go back and find out whether or not it's actually Wuhan would be the starting point of COVID-19. Climate change basically is something that we raised awareness of, is one of the biggest booster for future or potential disease exits. And it's a booster for these pathogens is most likely go from zoonotic transmission, means from the wildlife transmitted to human beings. And with all our globalized world, you can easily imagine that if the climate change changes the habitat of wildlife and we have an increased contact through globalization between animal and human contexts, we will also have an increase of zoonotic diseases. Climate change will also have an increase on foreign agents, which leads then to mutations, which leads then to, again, unknown pathogens, which makes the situation even worse. So for you, my first thought, as in, let's say, food for thought, would be that if you do entrepreneurship or you think about business, every business continuity should be basically based on risk assessment of potential effects of pandemic, or pandemic risk assessment should be an integral part of any business continuity management. This is actually not a very new idea. It's been on the agenda, on our agenda, since 1999, when the WHO got its guidelines for influenza pandemic preparedness. However, the problems that we try to build awareness is that the risk assessment actually was wrong. What you see here is the Global Risk Report of 2020 and from January, where a lot of multi-stakeholders who participate in this survey said, of course, yes, if we would face an infectious disease, the impact on businesses or the economic sector, state security, health sector would be the most and the highest. The problem was, though, that the probability of occurrence was underestimated. This is January 2020. And you see here that infectious diseases is not on the chart of the likelihood for potential risk. And if you look back in the last 10 years, I looked it up, you wouldn't find infectious diseases on the likelihood chart. I'm pretty sure that in 2021, it's a different pictures. It's a different picture. However, I'm afraid that in 2022, we will probably maybe not have infectious diseases here again. So here comes another food for thought that I'm trying to give you. And this is that the business model, if you do entrepreneurship, your business model can actually be as big as a threat. Why? What we see right now during COVID-19, we see amazing new startups and important investment in technology. For example, 3D printers who print supporting for ventilators. We do have the IT sector that is working on apps. However, we don't know yet, because we don't have enough data, if the treatment that we have with ventilators is the right treatment on the patient for them to overcome this disease. So you might have built up a business right now where you're building ventilators that in the end will basically not help that much. Or if it goes to the apps, we globally see we are living in a digital diverse societies. We do have, if you look in other countries, we do have people who don't have a smartphone. So this technology that is kind of the start to solve that problem will only be applicable, let's say, in our countries in Europe. So this brings me to the next point here, that what Bill Gates meant by business continuity should be based on risk assessment or prepare for war is basically understand your enemy, understand the root causes of a pandemic. And what I want to tell you here is that epidemics and pandemics have its own logic, right? They might occur in several waves. You've heard that throughout the news over the last weeks. But I've never seen a pandemic or an epidemic that was over in less than a year. So with COVID-19, at least we will have to deal with for 1 year, most probably 2 years. That means social distancing. We will see also in the beginning of 2021. We will have reduced international businesses until next year. We will have reduced travel. We might see like this, what is described as a dance going back and forth between lockdowns and openings. So before we enter this transition phase here, where businesses and economy can go over to the phase of recovery, this will not happen as long as we don't have the right treatment, as we don't have a vaccine, as we don't have a system for mitigation developed. And even worse, if you look at fragile contexts, scenarios of war, that will hold on for a very, very long time. And also these interpandemic phase, the phase between one pandemic and the next one, will be shortened. So the next pandemic will not hit us in 40 years. It will probably hit us in 10 years or in 15 years. So here is, again, food for thought that I would advise from my background to the entrepreneurship is that if you have your business model, build business model resilience, which means ensure that your business model is resilient to outside disruptions, and that you create by a comprehensive understanding of pandemics, which is not just a focus on supply chain, and it's not just a focus on your employees and how they stay healthy. It's learning from security risk management. It's learning from what militaries do, basically, and that is develop some kind of indicator system that identifies business uncertainties and risk dependencies, develop impact categories or impact timeframes, and then weighting them. And if you have a business right now, if you weight these indicators and you find them, then these will drive the change of your business. If you don't have them and you are about to become an entrepreneur, then evaluate your business idea against these new indicators. So last but not least, to sum that short introduction up, is what I see in politics and crisis management, but also in the entrepreneur area, is that we need globally to develop some kind of tolerance towards this uncertainty, because pandemics is something that we will deal with more often in a shorter period of time, because we need to avoid the intolerance towards the insecurity that we all face right now. Yeah, and I'm happy to discuss that later on with you guys.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Anja. So guys, we can now practice again our digital applause skills. Thanks so much for being here tonight and yeah, enlightening us with your knowledge. So first of all, I think it goes back to the audience. Whom of you does have any questions maybe at this point? You can just write them in the chat, or maybe some of you have already written, but I think not so many. So don't be shy, just go for it if there's anything on your mind. I think otherwise what we are doing, so what's good that when there's anything that you have, you can already write during the conversation. Otherwise, I already said, just take it, maybe like take it back for the breakout session in the end. And I think here we have a first question. So from Andrea, thank you very much for your question. Do you think that the current softening of the quarantine is a good idea?
I think it's most probably a bit too early, because we haven't understood enough what COVID-19 is doing to us. What I learned from my colleagues is that we, like in Germany, we have the discussion that the most infected people are basically the people with, of older age, who are already have been facing a severe illness or sickness. But what we learn now more and more from doctors who are treating COVID-19 patients, and more we see that young people with no symptoms at all in the first week develop even not symptoms in the second week, and then die because of a stroke. So what I'm saying here is that right now we don't have enough data actually to kind of reopen the lockdown that we have. And if I see outside people, which is totally normal, we need to get used to wearing these masks. And people need to still get used to social distancing. So I would give us a little more time. However, I see it's a very, very tricky thing, because there is a lot of pressure coming from the economy sector. And this is exactly why I put my presentation like I did. We have been warning for years now that this crisis will hit us, and we haven't been prepared. So this is kind of what we have to, let's say, balance right now, meeting the economic desire, but fighting ongoing disease. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, pardon. And I think there's so many other questions coming up. I think now they just needed a little moment to formulate them. But if you have anything to add, feel free, Anja.
Why will the next pandemic probably take place in 10 years? I do not have a crystal ball, but as I said, when I look on studies who are dealing with climate change, and what I learned from colleagues that are from the veterinarian sector, they warn us constantly that zoonotic diseases will hit us more often. And just imagine the short time frame between Ebola hit Africa and COVID-19 right now. It's not even 10 years. So that is this assumption I do based on the research that I read that are dealing with zoonotic diseases. Also, because someone mentioned antibiotic resistance, this is something that comes also with climate change, that microbes develop complex survival strategies and become resistant to the treatment that we have in terms of antibiotics. So our treatment to infectious diseases is, I would say, less sustainably, right? And that, let's put it this way, that increases the chance that we do not wait another 40 years. If it is 10 years, I don't know. But my point is we need to be aware that COVID-19 probably is not the last pandemic for us that we as youngsters maybe will face. Yeah.
Thanks. I think here's another question, Anja, that was just communicated. So the individual paranoia levels towards like social distancing and being scared, for instance, while food shopping differs every day. When Christina is asking, and she would like to know what do you think? What is the healthy golden way so that we kind of move forward from this at the moment? Should we like rather be careful, or what do you think is the best?
I think. First of all, what I face, like from my personal background, and when I get phone calls from people who are facing these anxieties, is I said this in one TV show in February. I think that the threat that people need to understand that we are in crisis mode for the next 1 or 2 years at least. And this is, I think, the first step we need to make mentally to understand that normal life will not be here in the summer, it won't be here in the fall, and it won't probably be here, let's say, at the end of the year, beginning of next year. So if we understood that and felt that anxiety, and the next step would be that we transfer this anxiety into innovative ideas on how to manage this. Because once you understood the threat, you're most likely be more able to practice social distancing, to go, and develop a new habit on how you shop, and then this hypering and this hype will probably decrease, I guess. So it's a physiological thing, I would say. If I understood the question right, I'm trying to read an answer.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And yeah, I think we have one last question, and then we move on to the next speakers, because otherwise we'll be horribly over time. But I think here one question that Max asked, he said that you mentioned that the next pandemic will be sooner than the next 10 to 15 years instead of 20 or something more. And then he asked, why do you think this is the case?
Yeah, that's why I just answered a different question to that. I said that what we learn from the research, what we learn, put it another way, what is still totally underestimated is the indicator system that is coming from the veterinarian sector. Every pandemic, nearly every pandemic and epidemic that we have seen over the last years was some kind of zoonotic disease, means it came from wildlife and it spread to humans. What our treatment and our risk assessment is that we are starting to think on patient one, right? Who was the first one who got and catched COVID-19? And then we start thinking from that one person, and we are missing the whole sector. So this is the danger here is that, as I said, climate change, and this is also something that we really underestimate, climate change is the biggest booster for zoonotic diseases to become more and more. So it's globalization. We are strongly interconnected. So the spread of a disease from a local cluster, let's say, going around the world is much easier than it has been a couple of years ago. We are flying more, we are traveling more, all these kind of stuff. Again, the topic of resistance to antibiotics is a big issue. The way our medical treatment is in the so-called you know, high economic countries compared to fragile countries that do not have any treatment at all is like a misfitting. So that will boost the possibility of a new pandemic to increase. And again, I do not have a crystal ball, but what I doubt is that it will take another 40 years. I always use this number, 40 years, but
yeah. Thank you, Anja. I think it's always super insightful to speak to you also now. I can only strongly recommend you also, if you have some other questions relating COVID-19, there's a lot of things that Anja can tell you. As I said, I've been spending like 1 hour asking her all of my questions, and it was just great. So I can only strongly recommend you to do this.